question. It's kind of lengthy. So I'm talking to my friend in a Bible study, and so when Jesus descends into Sheol to preach to Abraham's bosom after his after he dies, does he take Abraham's bosom to heaven right away? And if so, do they get their glorified bodies at that time, or do they have to wait for the rapture as well?
Okay, well, Kai, that is a great question. And so, Pastor Greg, can you give us some insight from the Bible about this whole issue of people dying before Jesus, going to Abraham's bosom, and then what's going to happen to them after that?
Well, the Bible tells us that when Jesus descended into Sheol, that he proclaimed. He's not preaching as in evangelism. He's proclaiming victory. And Kai, you're exactly right. He sets captivity captive. All the Old Testament saints are raised to heaven, but we don't get our glorified bodies until the first resurrection. So I think that's a short enough answer that leaves some meat on the bone for Pastor Scott. Take that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg. Yeah. And so what Pastor Greg just shared with you, Kai, that comes out of Ephesians chapter 4, especially, where it tells us that Jesus descended and then also ascended and led those who were in captivity captive. And most good Bible scholars believe that it was at that time between Jesus' death and his own resurrection that he took those souls out of Sheol, or also that part of Sheol, which is that's a Hebrew word for the underworld, or for actually the grave. And Jesus took those people from there. Another word the Jews used for it was paradise. So he took them from paradise and took them to the real paradise. He took them to heaven. What's interesting is those who would have been there are what we call the Old Testament saints. These would, of course, were believers from the Old Testament period, from under the Old Covenant. And so it does appear in Scripture that at some point in the future, the Old Testament saints are going to also rise from the dead and be given their glorified bodies as well. And Pastor Greg's right in that it will be part of what is, John tells us in Revelation chapter 20, part of the first resurrection. Those who are part of the first resurrection are people who are blessed because they're not going to take part in the second death. Now, here's the question usually comes up is when are the Old Testament saints going to be resurrected? And good Bible scholars do disagree on the timing of that. Most that I have read, and Greg, maybe you can help with this issue too, but most of what I've read kind of lean toward the Old Testament saints are going to be resurrected from the dead whenever Jesus sets up the millennium and raises the tribulation saints, those who die for the testimony of Jesus during the tribulation, when Jesus returns at the second coming, and then when he sets up his millennial reign. It tells us in Revelation chapter 20 that those saints are going to rule and reign with Jesus, those who died during the tribulation. And a lot of Bible scholars put the resurrection of the Old Testament saints there. Now, but we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but that's what some views are. I will say this. There is an interesting passage, and I'm not banking everything on it, but it is the only place in the New Testament where it does tell us that the Old Testament saints rose from the dead. And that is Matthew 27. When Jesus dies, it tells us that after his resurrection, that many of the saints, speaking of those who lived during the Old Testament time, they were already dead, were raised from the dead and went and showed themselves alive in the city of Jerusalem. Now, that is a very interesting scripture that Bible scholars, a lot of them will just admit, we don't really understand what happened here, but, these Old Testament saints were risen from the dead. Could it be because Jesus is, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he is the first fruits of the resurrection. And so, could it be that those Old Testament saints, when it says many of the saints, is it talking about all the Old Testament saints? Because many times in the New Testament, the word many means all. But there's one place, Matthew 27, where it does tell us that some of those believers and saints in the Old Testament were resurrected from the dead. They raised from the dead when Jesus did. But it really trying to figure out when that's going to happen, or if it did happen, is not real clear in the New Testament. Greg, do you have anything else you would like to chime in on that issue about when they're going to raise from the dead?
Sure. Well, we know that that Daniel 12 tells us that, well, I'll just read it to you. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. It seems like that may be happening at the same time, which would line up with what we read about in the Great White Throne Judgment of Revelation chapter 20. Where there's a book opened, and then there's books opened of people who don't have their name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. So I'm going to reiterate what Pastor Scott has said and what Pastor Chuck and so many men have taught us over the years. Where the Bible is silent, so am I. But at the same time, it's okay. It's okay to speculate without being extremely dogmatic about it. But guess what, Pastor Scott? At some point, we're going to find out, and we're going to be completely happy with how that works out. But I think I agree with you that that is when during the millennial reign, probably towards the very beginning of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I know too, this question came up some time ago when I was on with Mike, and I think I can't remember if it was exactly. I don't think it was the Old Testament saints though, but there was another question where there might be other people who are raised from the dead and to be judged at the Great White Throne Judgment, who were not necessarily unbelievers. I think it was, I can't remember what group it was, but anyhow, when it comes to this issue again, we just take the scripture and just give it our best shot for that, and then watch this happen, Greg. Watch when the rapture happens.
And we're all wrong.
Then right next to us is the Old Testament saints rising with us,
Yeah.
Of course, that would be another safe guess, right? That it would rise with us. So anyway.